So I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about the environment in which the older person lives and the effect that would have on their physical activity, particularly if they have a variety of medical conditions. So first thing I want you to do is just have a little think about what you do to support the older person and what the environment that they live in does to support that. So for example, do you tend to do things for them in case they get breathless or in case they have a fall? So are you in effect over caring and not allowing them the opportunity to do things that they might wish to do or try, and that you've essentially taken over because it's either quicker or, in your idea, safer to do it for them? So I want you to think about re-enabling rather than doing for them. That's an environment and a culture thing. The other thing I want you to think about is the temperature of the place that they live in. So that could be the room, their particular room in a care home. It could be the living room in the communal room in a care home. It could be their home that you're caring for them in their own home. And I wanted just to introduce you to some facts and figures from some studies looking at the effect of temperature on an older person. So I was involved in some work some years ago in Germany, where we had an environmental chamber that people could sit in, and we could set the temperature. And so we looked first of all at very hot rooms. So they just walked in and sat in a room that was 30 degrees centigrade. And we asked them just to sit there for 45 minutes, not a long time. Before they went in, we did a measurement of a variety of functions, and then we asked them to sit in that warm room in normal clothing, and then we measured them again. So in that very hot room, in just 45 minutes, all of the people developed postural hypertension. That's dizziness on standing. And so in other words, it was affecting their vascular system and how warm it was. The other thing that was interesting was that they could only walk a shorter distance after sitting in that hot room than they could beforehand. So it reduced their stamina and their endurance. And all of them had a high blood pressure. And that's just 45 minutes sitting in a really hot room. Now this, of course, could mean a hot summer, not that we get those very often in Scotland, but it could also just mean the temperatures hiked up. The other thing that was interesting is we looked at cold rooms. Now this tends to not be appropriate for care home environments, but may well be appropriate for someone who's receiving care at home. So if the room is 15 degrees, in 45 minutes we saw a much lower muscle power, about 5% drop in muscle power in just 45 minutes. That means they're less likely to correct a stumble if they trip, and might account for the fact that we see more falls in colder environments indoors, not just outdoors. So it's not slipping on ice, it's perhaps that their muscles are too cold to work properly. They also had a lower velocity or speed at which they could get out of a chair, and a slower walking speed when they were cold. So hot and cold affects our movement patterns. So in effect, if the place they're in is always very warm, do you notice them sleeping a lot? And of course, if they're sleeping, they're less likely to be moving. And the other thing I want you to consider is, can the person get outside easily if they want to get some fresh air or some sunshine? Is the door to the garden locked? Do they have the ability to get out into a safe environment to enjoy the outdoors? Or indeed, can they get involved in community activities that they used to be involved in and perhaps just require a little bit of support to get to still? And that could be going to church, it could be going to a Women's Institute meeting, or a gathering in a men's shed. All of these things mean that they can stay involved with their local community. But if the environment doesn't support them to do that, in other words, a bit of help or a bit of ability to get out and do things, then they're not going to be active, it's not engaging them. So I now want you to just have a little think about when people have quite a lot of ill health problems and they're frail. I'm going to show you a diagram just up here. And this essentially is reminding us that a frailer older person is only just above a level of independence that something as simple as urinary tract infection or a cold or a minor fall means that they suddenly become dependent in an activity of daily living that they've been able to do before. Now, sometimes with time, you will see that they will end up coming back up to normal. But actually, if we improved their movement patterns and got them more active, they'd have more reserve, and they'll be less likely the next time there's a minor ailment to be able to more likely to be able to cope with that, and less likely to become frailer as a result. So this frailty that we perceive an older person to have, particularly if they've got multiple medical conditions and they're on lots of medications, is in fact mostly in our heads, because if a person is encouraged to move more, many of the symptoms of their ill health will reduce. They'll be able to do more without getting breathless. They'll be able to do more without feeling wobbly. So practice makes perfect. Just like a well-tuned Olympic athlete, we need to make sure we practice the things we want to continue doing. And that can be anything from activities of daily living, such as brushing our own teeth, being able to be involved in our self-care, making our own bed, doing things such as washing the dishes and putting them away. All of these things become more easy if we repetitively do them. Just like running, cycling, the more we do them, the better we get at them. It's the same with activities of daily living. So as soon as someone starts having difficulty, the best thing to do is to get them to do it more often, and then they'll get better at it. Practice makes perfect. By always doing things for people and not encouraging movement, we can cause a quicker functional decline. And a prime example of that is the recent attention, both in the media and by academics, in the loss of function that older people get when they go into hospital. So, for example, some recent work that has shown that going into hospital, irrespective of the reason, will lead to a 10 to 50% functional decline in an older adult. And this is basically because they don't move when they're in hospital. They often stay in bed, or they might move to the side to the chair by the side of the bed, but essentially they don't move. It's an unfamiliar environment to them, so they're less keen to move. They're not encouraged to move, often even catheterised when there's no particular need, just because it's safer and easier than getting them to the toilet all the time. And all of these things will lead to a loss of muscle. As soon as you don't use it, you do lose it. Interestingly, it's not just hospitals that we see a massive decline in physical activity and movement in older adults. It's also in the care home environment. So many people, when they move into a care home environment, immediately become less active, less mobile, and move about less. In fact, some research looking at objective monitors put on residents in care homes, with their permission of course, showed that essentially they were spending 80 to 90% of their day sitting or lying down. Now this means that they're going to see muscle loss. They're only doing about 1% of the day in activity that gets them slightly warmer or slightly out of breath, and that's the activity that we know leads to quickest health benefits. But more importantly, they're still only spending about 20% of their day in light activity, i.e. just moving about the home, doing activities of daily living and being involved. This needs to go up. It needs to go up because otherwise we are actually causing harm to older adults by not encouraging movement. So finally, I'd just like you to think about what you can do to help an older person on their staircase to independence, starting from those that are bedbound, activities in the bed to warm up, keep the muscles moving, help flexibility, just little cycling movements with the feet or boxing movements with the arm, and anything that gets movement and blood flow happening. Perhaps get them into a sitting position as often as you can. That helps core muscles and helps maintain mobility and stability when they do stand up. Think about the transferring skills. The more often they transfer from bed to chair or from chair to wheelchair, with your help, will help build up muscle and make them do it more safely in the future. Practice makes perfect. Think about activities that engage them in standing as often as possible. Sit to stand transitions are really good for your muscle and for your lower legs in particular. So for example, one study in residents living in sheltered housing looked at adding a sit to stand at least once an hour during the day. And over a 10-week period, they had significant improvements in lower limb strength and balance. So they got more stable and steady just by sitting and standing more regularly. Think about getting them involved in more walking. Walking helps all sorts of other functions. It gets people connected. They can go to other people's rooms. They can go other places. They can perhaps even get to the point where they can leave the care home or leave their home more confidently. Again, reminder, practice makes perfect. And also think about things such as stair climbing. We often just think about handrails and avoiding that, but actually, again, practice makes perfect. And stair climbing is a great activity to build stability and balance. So, if repetitive use of stairs, perhaps starting with once a day to do up and down the stairs an additional time, and then perhaps a few weeks later do it twice a day, you'll see a huge improvement in that resident's movement patterns and confidence. If we get people involved in their own care a bit more, putting their own dishes away, washing their own dishes, maybe even feeding the cat themselves, those sorts of things will make all the difference. We really want to ensure that people can stay mobile and independent as possible, and that means practicing the things that they need to maintain to be independent. So I hope you'll think a little bit more about the environment with which you work with your older residents or older adults, and the environment you provide and the opportunities you provide for them to be active, moving more often and mobile. Think about making use of the Make Every Move Count and moving more often resources so that the resident or the client that you work with is at the centre of the conversation about why it's important for them to move, what's important to them in terms of what activities they want to be involved in, and basically put them at the heart of the conversation. Good luck.